Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is my colleague, Forbes staff writer, Zach Everson. Zach, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me back.
We've talked about Alt5 Sigma before, and this is the fintech company that struck the billion-dollar deal with World Liberty Financial, the crypto venture associated with the Trumps. And you have new reporting on Alt5 Sigma, and I think that the easiest way to break this down would be in chronological order. So let's go back to October. You reported then that the firm's CEO was suspended by the board. Then in November, you reported an inconsistency surrounding the timing of when the CEO was placed on temporary leave, and that could have violated SEC rules. Now you're reporting that yet another filing discrepancy could also violate SEC rules. This instance has to do with the timing of the accountant leaving. So, to start off the conversation, what exactly did Alt5 Sigma tell the SEC?
So this is what got interesting. Alt5 Sigma, back about a month or so ago, informed the SEC that it could not file its quarterly report on time for a variety of reasons that had been laid out in a previous filing, and also that there had been delays associated with its accountant. So I was writing an article on the fact that they could not file this quarterly report on time. This was before Thanksgiving. So in the course of my reporting, I reached out to the accountant and said, hey, Alt5 Sigma says there's a delay with your report. What's going on here? And the accountant said something I was not expecting, which was, I stopped working for them in August. That really struck out because they were the last accountant on record for any of their filings. I then reached back out to Alt5 Sigma saying like, hey, I sent you all these questions about what delays your accountant might be responsible for. Let's step that back a little bit. Who actually is your accountant? And the response came, we don't want to comment on that at this time, which was interesting for such a, what you think would be a simple question to ask a public company on that. So this happened before Thanksgiving. I was working on it. I took some time off. I had some turkey. I had some stuffing. I saw my family. I was going to work on this when I came back. Over the Thanksgiving holiday, though, on that Friday, Black Friday, after the market closed, Alt5 Sigma submitted a filing saying, hey, our accountant told us all of a sudden in November that he was retiring effective immediately. We don't have an accountant. We're working to fix that. That really didn't quite jive with what the accountant had told me. So you've got another example of Alt5 Sigma telling the SEC one thing in a date, in this case that their accountant retired in November. And then you've got the accountant saying he actually told them in July he was going to stop working for them in August, and he's actually not retiring. He's just getting out of the line of business of auditing public companies.
So I guess my next question for you would be, who's lying here? Is it Alt5 Sigma telling the SEC, hey, our accountant just essentially up and left and we're out of luck here when it comes to filing this third quarter report? Or is the accountant lying and didn't really leave months ago?
Are you trying to get us sued? I'm going to walk around that one. We don't know. I don't have any reason to believe that the accountant would have made this sort of stuff up. He said he didn't have anything in writing. He said he spoke to the person who was then the CFO, who's no longer with the company, and that he verbally told them. And, he said, I gave them plenty of notice. Now you've got Alt5 Sigma saying November. Now they have to report something like this within 4 business days. So they couldn't have reported in November and said, oh yeah, hey, our accountant, he left in August. That's problematic. So, I don't know. I don't know exactly what the disconnect happened there, why we have those 2 different dates, but the accountant was adamant he let them know back before the filing of their second quarter report.
And typically, why would a company not file their quarterly report? Is there any indication that this is just perhaps sloppiness, perhaps an oversight, or something more?
Now, the reason that Alt5 Sigma gave in its initial filing that there was going to be a delay and saying they needed a few extra days to do it was they listed a whole bunch of issues that they had going on. They referenced the filing, rather, that listed a whole bunch of issues. Amongst them, there was a problem. The former CFO we were talking about is going through personal bankruptcy issues that involve some warrants from the company. A subsidiary has had issues in Rwanda. They changed up the amount of votes that are required to have a quorum. So there are a whole bunch of issues that were laid out in the previous filing. So we don't know. And I mean, they did say they are having delays involving their accountant. And, if they don't have an accountant, that's probably true. They are having delays because they don't actually have an accountant.
I do want to take a step back here even further. When you're looking at a quarterly report, what information is typically in there and how vital is it for a company?
Oh, it's interim financial information. It's something that's supposed to be very important for investors to decide whether they want to own part of this company or not. It's a major factor. You will hear this throughout, the investment news where, oh, this company's coming, it's releasing its earnings. You see this huge news with, Apple and Nvidia, companies that are much bigger than Alt5 Sigma, but it is a major force there that can massively move markets. Again, not with a company of this size, but it is a major issue. It's one of the few times that companies actually have to report this kind of stuff publicly.
And Alt5 Sigma told the SEC that the accountant left a certain date. The accountant tells you he left a different date. It's more than 4 days apart, well more than 4 days apart. Can they get in trouble, Alt5 Sigma, for this discrepancy? And or can they get in trouble for not filing this report on time?
They can get into trouble for both of those based on reading the SEC rules and also speaking to a couple experts in financial law. And that, yeah, submitting information that is materially false is problematic. Also, not informing them in time is an issue. Now, whether any of this gets enforced is another matter. It seems like the SEC under Donald Trump is not really doing a lot of enforcement in general, and speculation. But it seems like the SEC is not particularly going to be motivated to go after a company that is holding, that acquired $1.5 billion of World Liberty Financial Tokens, which is a company that Donald Trump co-founded and has a financial stake in.
And so now you're reporting this report and then your report last month that Alt5 Sigma could have violated SEC rules multiple times now. Would the SEC investigate? I know that you said it's not looking likely. What would that really look like?
It's a great question. They do have a subpoena power, is my understanding, so they could get all sort of documentation there, internal emails that might show one side versus the other. Now, one area that the company is facing repercussions is with Nasdaq, which is a regulatory agency, not a government body, but they have informed Alt5 Sigma recently that they were at risk of being delisted because they're out of compliance for not having filed that quarterly report. So that was something we reported yesterday, where Alt5 Sigma now has a few months to get back to the Nasdaq and say, okay, we are back in compliance. We're having our stuff on order. Here's how we're going to make sure this mistake doesn't happen again. So they are looking at some potentially being delisted from Nasdaq as a result of not filing that quarterly report.
And how common is that for Nasdaq to tell a company, hey, you're no longer meeting requirements to be listed. You're non-compliant. You could be delisted. Is that rare?
No, it's a great question. I don't know. They do have a whole webpage of companies that are out of compliance, so it's not something that's unique. We covered this before. We probably spoke about it before. This happened with Digital World Acquisition Corp, the blank check company that acquired Trump Media, parent company of Truth Social. They were actually sent a similar letter that they were at risk of being out of compliance. So we have a couple examples of it happening here, but it doesn't sound all that common. I asked William Hudgens, who is Alt5 Sigma's former accountant, just, in general, what does it mean when a company doesn't submit a quarterly report? And he said that usually means that it has some sort of issues.
And so since Nasdaq alerted Alt5 Sigma and say, hey, you're no longer meeting the listing requirements, did it automatically get delisted? What are the next steps here for Alt5 Sigma?
No, it's still there. It's still listed. The next steps would be to come back to Nasdaq with that plan to explain how they're going to be in compliance. Obviously, they need to get an auditor on board pretty quickly. And then they still have that outstanding quarterly report from the third quarter that they haven't filed.
And from someone who covers mostly politics, I don't get into the nitty gritty of who's violating what SEC rules. How serious is this? Is this, a slap on the wrist violation? Is this something that a lot of companies deal with, violating these rules, potentially getting delisted from Nasdaq? How would you rate this on a scale?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, I specialize more in politics as well. I'm coming at this from an angle of Donald Trump's finances, and he really didn't have a lot of interest in public markets up until recently. But it does seem serious. You're not going to find companies like Apple or Microsoft failing to submit these quarterly filings. They're typically going to be filings that companies that are worth considerably less, and it does seem to be problematic. If they couldn't do this sort of basic requirement of being a public company, it does make you wonder what other issues they might have.
And How has Alt5 Sigma responded? I'm sure you've reached out for comment. What have they said?
They have said, let's see, they did not respond on this one regarding the being out of compliance. And when I asked them about the accountant, they had said that they didn't care to comment at this time. I followed up, did not hear anything back from them. It's kind of hit or miss whether they respond to us or not. Their spokesperson did ask if I had any other things I was reporting about, or if I was just focused on Alt5 Sigma of late. And I said, well, I do have other things, but right now you guys have been really interesting.
And even today, you and I are talking about another one of your stories in a different video. So you are reporting on other things, but we have talked about Alt5 Sigma before. We've talked about a staffing shakeup there where the CEO was placed on that temporary leave. Is there any update on any staffing shakeup there? Has anyone else been put on leave? What does that look like?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There has been a lot of other news. So this press release about the accountant came on, after markets closed on Black Friday. What we're about to talk about came, I believe it was after markets closed on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. They announced that the acting CEO, who was also the current CFO, was gone. The chief operations officer, they were not going to renew his consulting contract, although he would stay on in a board role, and also that another director had resigned. Those are all three people who were involved in the suspension of the previous CEO that we had discussed. Obviously the acting CEO is the person who took over for the CEO who's placed on leave, and the COO, the message that we saw where he posted that the CEO was on temporary leave in September, as opposed to when the company said in October, that was posted from the chief operations officer, and the director who resigned, he's the one who actually signed that email. So you've got three people who were pretty involved with that. Are no longer with the company, except the COO is still on the board of directors. So there's a little bit of a connection there still for him. But, we did see a massive personnel change the day before Thanksgiving.
And has World Liberty Financial, the crypto company that's associated with Trump, have they responded at all about this? Because they struck that $1 billion deal with Alt5 Sigma just a few months ago.
Yeah, interestingly, they appear to be sharing a spokesperson. So, when I reached out to the person who I was first introduced to as being the spokesperson for World Liberty, when they got back to me with some answers, they said, this is from Alt5 Sigma. So I think there's a lot of overlap there, which is not all that surprising. You touched on it earlier, setting up why this company matters. It's got a huge overlap with World Liberty Financial, which of course is the crypto venture co-founded by Donald Trump and his three sons. They're affiliated with an LLC that owns 38% of the company. They get a cut from token sales. They have 22.5 million of these tokens as well. When this deal happened, you've got Alt5 Sigma acquired $1.5 billion at the time of these tokens. Now, $750 million worth of those it got by issuing more stock, selling it, using the money to buy. The rest came in a deal with World Liberty Financial, where it got Alt5 Sigma got $750 million worth of tokens, and World Liberty Financial got 1 million shares of the company's stock. Zach Witkoff, son of Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's Middle East envoy and is one of the co-founders of World Liberty Financial, he's now chairs the board at Alt5 Sigma. Eric Trump was initially announced to be a member of the board of directors, but after consulting with Nasdaq for reasons that we don't know, he became an observer instead. And then another guy named Zach Folkman, who is also a World Liberty Financial co-founder, is in fact on the board of directors of Alt5 Sigma. So you've got a lot of overlap between these two companies.
And then my next question to you would be, does President Trump himself make any money from what you described as that huge overlap between World Liberty Financial and Alt5 Sigma?
Yeah, he certainly stands to profit. Now, right now, his tokens and those of other founders of World Liberty Financial are locked up, so they can't actually trade those right now. But by Alt5 Sigma acquiring $1.5 billion worth of tokens, that certainly raises the price of these tokens that Trump has, that at some point he might be able to sell. So that certainly helps there. And then the valuation of World Liberty Financial, the better Alt5 Sigma does, the better World Liberty Financial does, because it has a million shares of its stock with warrants to obtain another 99 million.
And you've been following the stories when it comes to Alt5 Sigma. I guess when you're looking at what's next for the company, what questions do you still have?
Where's the quarterly report? When are we going to get the quarterly report? What does it say about its financials? Um, that's really interesting to me. How it explains this discrepancy with the auditor dates, if it's asked. How it explains the discrepancy between the CEO suspension dates, if it's asked. So there's a lot of questions right there. Now we can see a fair amount of how the company is doing financially without seeing that quarterly report because it is so tied into World Liberty Financial. We can see that what was $1.5 billion worth of tokens as of yesterday was down to about $1.1 billion worth of tokens. Meanwhile, the company's market cap, its value on the market, was 206 million, I think it was. So the value of the company was about 1/5 of the value of those Trump tokens that it's holding. So that is the market thinking that this company is not great if it's valuing it at such a discount to these tokens that it holds.
Well, Zach, per usual, I appreciate the reporting. And when we see that third quarter report, when and if we see eventually the fourth quarter report, I hope you can come back on and break it down with me. I appreciate the time.
Of course, looking forward to it.